Let's turn back to the fallout from the frontline debate. Minister Lucinda Crichton, as you heard Tara say, they're saying there is scope for an Oireachtas inquiry or some other investigation. Let's have a listen to what she's been saying.
It worries me very much that a tweet like that could be read out on air, unsubstantiated and not corrected. Of course, I think anybody who respects freedom of speech, but also the right to a good name and reputation, would concern them. I think there is unease, full stop, and I think that's correct. I think it's right that there is unease, and I feel uneasy about it.
Lucinda Crichton saying that she feels uneasy about it and that the tweet worries her very much. Fianna Fáil's communications spokesperson Niall Collins was speaking on Newstalk this morning. He's another one who thinks there should be some kind of inquiry into what happened.
All the facts need to be put into the public domain. It is, in my opinion, of such grave and serious concern to the wider public. It's fully within the public interest that we know exactly the chain of events, who was in charge of the whole process, I suppose, really is the best way to describe it. Who knew what, when and where did they know it?
That was the communication spokesperson for Fianna Fáil, Niall Collins, speaking on Newstalk Breakfast this morning. We'll talk about the issue of greening various parts of the world for St Patrick's Day in a moment, but we're joined on Newstalk Lunchtime by the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, Leo Varadkar. Minister, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Before we move on to the St Patrick's Day story, can I just ask for your thoughts on this issue now at the moment with regard to RTE? You heard your party colleague there saying that there is unease about everything that has played out over the last few days. Where would you stand on calls for an inquiry?
Well, I think initially there should be an internal inquiry within RTE if they're not doing that already. And then really see what comes out of that. And obviously, if that isn't satisfactory, then maybe there is a case for a broader inquiry. But there's two issues, really, I suppose, that needs to be addressed. RTE is a public service broadcaster. We all pay the licence fee for it, but it does have a long-standing bias, to liberal and left causes by and large. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and is something that they don't even seem to realise themselves are correct for. The other issue relates to texts and tweets and emails being read out on air, and that's not unique to RTE. Pretty much the entire broadcast media does that, and to be brutally honest, I have a big problem with that, principally because nobody checks as to who the person is, whether what they're saying is valid, or what their agenda is. And I've often been on air and heard emails and texts read out, and I know full well who sent them in and what their agenda was, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of concern about that, and something, a letter that you wouldn't publish in the paper shouldn't be read out on the radio in the form of a tweet or a text. But I think that's a problem that the entire media has to address.
Well, the RTE is a public body. We've had public bodies investigate themselves in the past. I think of FÁS, and then I think of everything that happened after FÁS. And I just wonder now if RTE, as a public body, is investigating itself, if that's going to restore its good name, as needs to be done quite quickly. So is there any measure of sense in bringing them before maybe the Oireachtas Broadcasting Committee to thrash this out in a more public forum so they can put it to bed once and for all?
Yeah, well, ultimately that's a matter for that committee, but I'd be very surprised if the committee didn't decide to do that. But it's not for me to tell an Oireachtas committee what to do. There's a separation of powers between the government and the Parliament, which is important, but I'd be surprised now if the Oireachtas committee didn't decide it was appropriate to call them in. But like I say, it's a broader issue. Things that people wouldn't publish in a paper shouldn't really be read out in the radio in the form of tweets and texts, and that applies to Newstalk as much as it applies to RTE.
Are you just very unhappy? I mean, we get tweets and texts and we invite our listeners to contact us the whole time. I mean, we are very careful about what we put on air and what we put to people. I mean, a lot of the time, Minister, we're just getting the feeling of the people who are listening to the radio station. I mean, it's not all the personal slights that you seem to be suggesting. There are a lot of very valid reasons and suggestions that come from our listeners.
Well, you get the feelings of people who are texting in and tweeting in, but they may not be representative of the general public. I'd say most people out there have never sent a text or a tweet into a radio station. Meanwhile, party press offices are vigorously doing exactly that. So very often you're reading out something which you claim to be the view of the public, but it's not. It's the view.
Did Fine Gael ever take part in that themselves?
Absolutely, sure, you know that.
Well, why are you criticising it then? If your party did it as its own policy in the past, why are you criticising it now?
Because you have to play the game, and unfortunately the game isn't a very good one. And if we're going to raise standards across the media, some responsibility has to fall on the media themselves. essentially what political parties do is a response to the fact that everyone else is doing this, and you have to get into the game and have your message put across. And the reality is that, quite frankly, radio stations and journalists and others should know better than to read out something, believing it is the view of the public without actually questioning the agenda. You wouldn't bring somebody on air and interview them without asking them what their representative is or what their agenda is, but yet tweets and texts get read on air as if they're from members of the public, and of course most of the time they're not.
Well, a lot of the time they are from members of the public, Minister, and we do try and verify everything we put across. Just to clarify one thing.
It comes from an email address, or it comes from
it comes from a mobile phone number, and a lot of the mobile phone numbers that come in, we often would contact that person to make sure that they are who they say they are. I mean, a lot of the time stuff would come through that we look at and we say, well, we're not putting that to whoever is on the other side of the telephone line because we can't verify it. Look, one other thing, Minister, before we move on from this, the big difference about what happened on Frontline was this was supposedly from an official source from a political party, and that wasn't checked. I mean, that was the big issue on the night in question, wasn't it?
It was, absolutely, and that was a big mistake on the part of RTE. But like I say, if you're going to read out texts and tweets on the radio, they should be treated the same as a letter you would publish in the newspaper, and you should always check who it's coming from. It's just not.
So we shouldn't be putting out, in your opinion, we shouldn't be putting out any listener comment. We should be silencing our listeners.
Not at all. I think you should check. You should check out where they're coming from. That's really that used to be good journalism. You check your sources twice. You wouldn't just take something from any random anonymous person and put it on air.
Well, I'd be pleased to hear. I still do check all of my sources vigorously before I do any interview. But anyway, Minister, we're talking about the issue of the Patrick's Day celebrations. Many more of these items have cropped up now. I mean, there was a long list, but where else has been added now that we're turning green for the day? And is this costing the taxpayer anything?
Well, the list is getting longer. We've got the Leaning Tower of Pisa signed up, so they're going to go green on St. Patrick's Day. The Chrysler Building in New York as well. Selfridge's department store in London. The soccer stadium in Poznan, where Ireland plays its games, is going green. And actually a whole Spanish town is going green too. So it's a great opportunity to promote Ireland and promote Irish tourism. And what it means is that in those countries where it's happening, on the main evening news, the greening of the building will be featured, and everyone on the news will be talking about Ireland and featuring Ireland. And that's really a huge benefit to us because it'll get people thinking about coming to visit Ireland.
Is it going to cost us anything?
It's pretty small. The cost is being borne by Tourism Ireland, and which is funded both by the North and South. So the whole thing is costing about €9,000, and then I think it's 5,000 for London. So I think the entire cost is less than €20,000. But the value of the publicity of being on BBC News and Swedish News and the American TV and you name it is much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's brilliant that you see it happening, and in London in particular on the weekend. It's the weekend we're playing England over there, so it's a very apt time to be turning everything green. But we were doing a little bit of research, Minister, proper research, you'll be pleased to hear, ringing around hotels to see how much it was going to cost to get in to a hotel in Dublin this weekend. The prices that we came across were quite frightening, because there was one hotel on a website that was quoting €723.60 for 2 nights in a standard double room. The hotel itself, even when we rang them, it was €398 for the same room for 2 nights. What's the point in publicising the St. Patrick's Day celebrations if people who want to come here are going to be charged those prices?
Well, I'm sure there are better prices than that you can get, not just in Dublin but around the country as well. But hotel prices in Ireland are actually very low. They're among the lowest in Western Europe, and even though they may go up when there's big occasions in town or big things happening, bear in mind for a lot of the year hotels are actually selling their rooms below cost, so you do need to balance that up.
But should they not be balancing the industry? Should they not be balancing it themselves? They don't jack up the prices ridiculously every time there's an opportunity, when they know there are people coming to town and everyone leaves this country with a sense of it's still rip off Ireland.
Yeah, well, of course they shouldn't, and this is one of the things that we're working on with the industry, is to have a code of practice for the gathering next year, that when the big events and the big flagship events are happening, that they won't put up the prices beyond what is reasonable. Well,
what would you describe as reasonable?
But that depends. That's going to depend from case to case. A hostel, will say, on the Quays is different to the Marion Hotel. So you have to bear in mind what the prices will be. But they do have maximum rates in those cases.
All right, we leave it there. Minister Leo Varadkar, thanks very much for talking to us at Newstalk Lunchtime, Minister. Lots of people getting in contact with us actually to discuss what the Minister has been saying. 53106 is the number for your text messages. You can get in contact by Twitter if you feel brave enough to do so. Use the Newstalk hashtag or at Jonathan Healy.